Hello, and welcome to the Write Club podcast, where we take you behind the pages and into the fascinating world of writing. I'm Mary, and this is Beth, and we're part of the team at Writing Magazine and Writers Online. Hi, Beth, how are you?
I'm really well, thank you. I'll get straight on to introducing this week's brilliant guest, Deepa Anappara. Deepa's debut, Djinn Patrol on the Purple Line, was named as one of the best books of the year by the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time, and NPR. It won the Edgar Award for Best Novel and was longlisted for the Women's Prize Fiction in 2020. Time included it in its list of the 100 best mystery and thriller books of all time, which is what an achievement. And it's been translated into over 20 languages.
Born in Kerala, southern India, she worked as a journalist in India for 11 years. Her reports on the impact of poverty and religious violence on the education of children won the Developing Asia Journalism Awards and the Every Human Has Rights Media Awards, amongst other accolades. Her second novel, The Last of Earth, is out now.
Deepa, welcome to the White Club podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Such a
Oh,
pleasure to be here.
we're so thrilled to have you with us. Where is it that you're joining us from today?
So I live in Essex, about an hour from London.
And are you in your usual writing space, or would you be able to tell us a little bit about that?
I am. I write in a very small study. I've seen closets in American houses that are bigger than the space of my study. And most of the space in the study is taken up by this big table. And I usually spread out a lot of books as I'm writing. There's usually a lot of material. So I like having everything around me. So one of the first things that I did was to get this massive table, which takes up most of the space, and it's filled with books. I always joke that one of these days, these books are going to fall on me, and that's that's going to be my end. But yeah, this is where I've written now two novels and co-edited this collection of essays.
Well, what a way to go, though, if you have to go out anyway. Going out by getting crushed by a load of books, I think is pretty much perfect way to go out for any author, really. And have you always wanted to be a writer?
I did actually. I wanted to be a writer from the time I was a child because I was a voracious reader. And, I read books which were not really age appropriate, but just because, I enjoyed reading them. I liked, learning about new places. I grew up in this tiny village in Kerala. And before the internet and, television was just like two channels. So there wasn't a lot of things to do. And so books were, a huge part of my life. It was a way for me to escape. And I think that's where it started, my desire to be a writer, because I wanted to do something that I saw these novelists and writers doing.
I've really enjoyed your novel, The Last of Earth. Could you give our listeners a brief description of the story?
So this is the part that I find tough because it's very hard to describe the novel briefly, but
Yes.
do bear with me. I'm going to try. So The Last of Earth is based on true stories. It's set in the mid 19th century in Tibet. At that time, Russia was controlling most of Central Asia, and the British Empire was controlling most of South Asia. And both these empires were at war with each other, a Cold War of sorts that was known as the Great Game. And for the British Empire, the big fear was that the Russians would invade the Indian subcontinent through Tibet. So they wanted to gain control of Tibet and to understand its geography and economy. But Tibet was close to foreigners. It was actually known as the Forbidden Kingdom. So it had, just the title had all sorts of this mystical aura for people who wanted to be explorers. A lot of Westerners tried going into Tibet, many of them quite unsuccessfully. The British, what they did was they trained Indians in very basic cartography techniques so that they could go into Tibet and map the territory for them. So they would bring back that knowledge about Tibet. And then the British would put together these maps so they would have an understanding of, if they were ever to go into Tibet, what would they have to watch out for, like the mountains, where are the rivers, what are the water sources. So I wanted to write the story about these Indians who worked for the British because essentially, the British were controlling India and they didn't see Indians as they didn't see Indians as being on a par with them. They were essentially Indians were second-class citizens in their own country. And then by spying on Tibet, which is a culture which is more affinity to, these spy surveyors at that time, they were essentially betraying Tibetans as well. So I wanted to write that story to understand what that Indian experience would have been. And then as I was researching the subject, I came across stories of female explorers who traveled through Tibet. This was in the Victorian times when women didn't have a lot of, freedoms. They were wearing even very restrictive clothing. So for them to climb these altitudes in Tibet, where the average altitude is something like 13,000 feet, it would have been an unimaginable feat, but they did that. So I wanted to write this story telling, these aspects of exploration which are not very well known, and from these points of view that we don't really see in historical records, which is one is an Indian man named Balram who is spying for an English captain, and he's taking the English captain through Tibet. And then we have Catherine, who is an English explorer who wants to be the first European woman to reach Lhasa. So the Last of Earth is a story of these two people who are traveling through Tibet, and they're battling, the vagaries of the landscape, their own emotional issues, their grief, and other problems that come up as well. So yeah, sorry, that's not brief, but that's the story.
No, that's it. That is the story, though. It's so in depth. I absolutely loved it. It's a macro and a micro story altogether. So get so involved in the characters, but also the wider. I went and did a load of research when I was reading it because I was so fascinated by it.
Oh, thank you.
We've just mentioned it is such an interesting idea for a novel, and I know you've said that it's kind of based off of true events that have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Where did the inspiration come from to write this novel?
So I think I first saw the story in Kipling's Kim, Rudyard Kipling's Kim. It has these Indians who are spying in Tibet for the British explorers. But I actually, came to know of this story in greater detail at a secondhand bookshop in London. I'd gone in and I saw this book, which was an explorer's account of traveling to Tibet in the 19th century. And he had these two Indian men who worked with him. He called them manservants. And he, in the book, he says that he is indebted to these manservants because without them, he would not have survived that expedition in Tibet because, it's such a risky territory. There were robbers, there were bandits, there was, all these storms. You can't really be sure of what you're seeing because the altitude is very high and, you don't have enough oxygen to breathe. And so if you're an outsider, you really struggle in that region. So these two men kept him alive. And but in the very first pages, he also talks about whipping them because they don't really know how to behave. So essentially, he looks at it as a civilizing mission. And I wondered what the power dynamic would have been for him once he was in Tibet, when he was very much, at their mercy. So he doesn't have that instruments of empire that he would have had back in India. And so away from that, away in this landscape where he's very much dependent on these Indians who are essentially just his porters for his survival, what would their relationship would have been? So I think that was the initial question, and then I started researching the subject and I found these accounts of, or at least stories of Indians who had traveled to Tibet and, brought back information, geographical information for the British. So I think that was really the starting point for the story.
As you said, the novel has two stories that run concurrently.
Mm-hmm.
They only come together at the very end of the novel, and I was fascinated. Did you write them as almost two separate stories, or did you always know that they were going to, be integral to each other?
Yeah, I think, typically I've heard people say that if you have more than one voice, it's best to write in one voice so that you don't kind of lose it. And if you keep switching points of view, then it's very hard to stay in that voice. But for this particular novel, I found that didn't really work for me. And I think that in part that was because where they were in the geographical space was really important to write that particular chapter because, it depends on whether they are up a mountain or are they by a river or, are they by a lake? So those sorts of differences in the landscape would have a huge impact on the expedition as well. So I found that I couldn't really do that because I needed to track both of them during their journey through Tibet. And, they were traveling simultaneously, even though these are not interconnected narratives in the traditional sense. Thematically, they do speak to each other. And there is a character that frequents both perspectives that appears in both sections. So for me to figure out where each person was going to be, I found that I just had to write it, quite organically. So I would write a Balaram chapter and then I would write a Catherine chapter. And I had a map, an old map of Tibet, so that I could track where they would be. So yeah, and I found that was really important to do, just because that was the only way for me to figure out where they would be at each point and how I knew their stories would eventually intersect, and where and how was that going to happen. I could only do that by writing it simultaneously.
Yeah, because they are on the journey at the same time, aren't they? So,
Yeah.
and that character that goes in between, he's a really interesting character. I enjoyed that.
Thanks.
On that, actually, then, so the characters are very vivid and they're very varied. So which was your favorite to write and why?
So I don't really have a favorite character to write, I would say, because I think for me, all of them have to be interesting. Otherwise, it's very hard for me to write, a novel, it takes me 3 years. I think this book took such a long time, maybe 5 or 6 years. And it's very hard to write a novel if you're not interested in all the characters equally. I think they all have their own motivations, their ambitions. They also have their secrets and their flaws. So I think for me, it was interesting to write all of them. I think I'm most interested perhaps in writing people whose points of view are not there on the page. So people like Chetak, or Balram's friend Gyan, or Catherine's guide Mani. We don't see their point of view at all, and they appear as secondary characters. And I think, I find it an interesting challenge to think about how can I portray them on the page in a way that, they really come alive. And we can see that they have their own agency, even though we are seeing them within this, from the restricted point of view of another person. How do they portray themselves and how do they represent themselves? And I think that's an interesting challenge to negotiate for me as a writer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you have a really valid point there, in that if you're not interested in the characters that you're writing, you can't really expect readers to be either. So that's kind of like number one tip there, is write what you're interested in as well. Otherwise you're gonna probably struggle. You're gonna run out of passion for the book. And eventually it's nine times out of 10 it's probably not going to get to the end because you're not interested or invested in it as much as what you should be.
And sometimes, I mean, not in this book, but I have read books before where one character is so much more developed than the others. So I think it does become quite obvious if the author isn't really invested in all of their characters. And obviously you had such a large cast of characters in this book, but they were all really fleshed out and interesting.
Did you have a favorite character, Mary?
I really liked Catherine, but I also liked Manny. I liked all of them. There were so many great characters. Even the characters that I didn't really like, you could see they all had, you got to like them. Even there, I can't remember the English explorer's name, but there was a lot of things to not like about him, but actually you understood him as a character. It was interesting.
His name is actually not mentioned in the book.
Oh,
because I took a very deliberate decision, because everything is named after, the English people who call themselves explorers. And in this book, I didn't want them to have a name. So none of the, English explorers mentioned in the book, or the Swedish explorer who is also there in the book, none of them have names. So that was a very deliberate decision on my part. But I think, it was for me, I really had to understand the English captain's motivations too for doing this, because when you think about it, it just does not make any sense. I mean, I know Britain is cold, like everybody wants to leave right now because it's freezing. But to put yourself under, this kind of pressure, it's something else. Like it's a desire to leave a legacy. It's combined with ambition and ego. So I really had to try and understand, the English captain as well to write this book. And yeah, I always feel worried whenever someone who's read the book says, or the captain is terrible or anything like that, because I wanted him definitely, or at least I tried to make sure that he had more depth than that. Yeah, at least towards the end, I think if you read till the end of the book, maybe you get a better sense of who he is as a person.
Yeah, you see his vulnerabilities as you go on and how indebted he is to his guides. Yeah.
And I know you just said that it probably took over 5 years or so to write the book. There must have been a lot of research involved in the process of writing this book. So would you be able to tell us a little bit about how that kind of process worked for you?
Yeah, I think I was quite methodical, I would say, in my research, partly because I trained as a journalist, and so I have that experience of having like a mass of data in front of you and then trying to figure out what are the details that you need to pick out from this data. So I think with this book, I just started first by reading explorers' accounts, people who traveled to Tibet at that time. And then I followed that up with, visits to the British Library, which holds quite a lot of these details of the geographical expeditions that British explorers undertook at the time. I also visited the archives at the Royal Geographical Society and also the Survey of India in Dehradun, which is in India. So it's I think, I looked for a lot of this material is now available without copyright online. So the Royal Geographical Society's accounts, you can find that. And yeah, so I think it's very hard to now remember, but I read like huge, a number of books, number of accounts by both male and female explorers who traveled to Tibet, and number of accounts which were published in the Royal Geographical Society's journal. And then I had to sit down and kind of put together, what is it that I really need to use? What is really valid for this particular story? I always say that it's, in a historical novel, you need to get so many details right about the setting, and that can be quite difficult. But because so much of this expedition is outdoors, so at least I didn't have that particular constraint. So I didn't really need to learn more about, the society or what was happening in a village or a town, because mostly they were just walking in the great outdoors.
Am I right in thinking that you took an evening course in creative writing? And could you tell us a little bit about that and the benefits that can be gained from taking an evening course?
I did take, I started with an evening course in creative writing. And then I went on to do an MA and also a PhD. I think for me, the biggest benefit of a creative writing course, I would say, is that I got to meet like-minded people who really wanted to write, and were also very serious analytical readers. So they were not just writers, but they were also interested in reading. And I think that kind of community, it would have been really hard for me to find elsewhere. And what the programs gave me was a chance to meet these people. And not only are they my friends now, but I still, they're often my first readers. Sometimes when I complete a book, I send work to them. So I think more than the program itself and more than anything about writing technique, it was meeting these people that was one of the huge benefits of studying creative writing. My friends and I often say that it was like, this very expensive matchmaking process for writers. So I don't necessarily say that that's the only way you can find a community, but for me, that was the way in which it happened. And of course, I also learned quite a lot about, aspects of craft and technique. And I didn't, I studied journalism. I didn't study English literature at all. So I had no basic formal grounding, on aspects of craft. And that was something that I really learned on the both the evening course and the MA that I did consequently.
That's fascinating. We talk about writing communities a lot, don't we? And yeah, it's so important to have readers and people that you can talk to about writing and yeah, that community.
Yeah, I think there is this idea that you work by yourself and then, you're like a genius and then
Yeah.
you send your work and maybe you take feedback just from your editor and agent. But I always tell my students that, that's the industry and there's always a business focus. Whereas when, your friends read your work and your friends who are writers read the work, they're not necessarily looking only at the commercial angle because, that's not their main concern. Can this book sell or not? I'm not saying we should not think about sales, but I think in that first round of feedback that you get, it's often nicer to hear about what are the craft elements that are working or not, and not just about, how am I going to pitch this book or who's going to be its ideal reader.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's
definitely.
such valuable advice for anybody that's currently working on a book or anything really within the creative kind of world, to just get it out to as many people as possible and get as many eyes on it, even before, like you say, getting it to an editor or an agent or anything like that. Actually having somebody who would read the book actually read it from a reader point of view, not a business point of view, to make sure that you're kind of along the right lines is massively beneficial. And is there anything that you're working on at the minute?
I am working on a novel, but it's too early. Who knows if it's even a novel? I don't know at this point. With The Last of Earth, I wrote 30,000 words in a different voice, and then I threw that out. So, I mean, so I don't know what's happening right now. It's just that I think I need to write. Otherwise, I feel something is missing. So I am writing, but who knows what it will be.
And we always like to end the Right Club with a book recommendation for our listeners. So is there something that you've read recently that inspired you that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
I'm going to just mention the very last book that I read over Christmas break, which was Love Forms by Claire Adam. It was longlisted for the Booker Prize, published maybe by Sarah Jessica Parker. I'm not really sure. Or maybe she has a different editor now. I don't know all that. Anyway, I won't go into all that. But I think what I liked about the novel is that, it is presented as a story of a woman in her middle age looking for a daughter that she had been forced to give up when she was 16. But what really surprised me was how Claire Adam constructed the narrative because, it becomes a character study, it's a personal history, and you also get the history of, the community and the country. So I think I really admired that book. Yeah, happy to recommend.
That sounds great.
Another one to add to the list.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been so lovely to talk to you today. And we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, and thanks for the great questions as well.
Oh, brilliant. And good luck with the next novel.
Thank you. I'll need it.
Thanks for tuning into the Right Club. We hope you enjoyed this episode and feel inspired to keep writing. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at Writers Online, your go-to for writing tips, competitions, and exclusive updates. Plus, you'll never miss an episode of the Right Club. Until next time, happy writing.